Good evening. On behalf of Baptist Health, I want to welcome you to our Resilience and Strength 2021 series, supporting the mental well-being of the Black community. I'm Lynn Sherman, Director of Community Engagement with Baptist Health. Today starts the beginning of our three-part series focusing on our Black elders. This series exemplifies Baptist Health's commitment to improving the health and well-being across multicultural communities. Each of our sessions includes a Baptist Health clinician, a faith leader, and a caregiver, or individuals with lived experience. This session is about providing reliable and accurate information and inspiration to help seniors, our Black elders, in managing their mental well-being through the COVID-19 pandemic. Our moderator is Selena Webster Bass, founder, CEO of the Voices Institute, a health education, research, and consulting group focused on eliminating health disparities, promoting minority health in children, youth, and families. She also trains in advancing health equity in communities, organizations, and systems. Ladies and gentlemen, Selena Bass.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Lynn, and thank you to our community members for joining our Resilience and Strength series. Today's session is focused on the mental well-being of our Black elders, and I'm delighted to introduce to you our esteemed panel. I'd first like to start with Dr. Courtney Ross. Dr. Ross is board certified in family medicine and geriatric medicine and has been practicing in Jacksonville since 2018 in geriatric outpatient primary care, house calls, and now telemedicine in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. She completed her geriatric medicine fellowship training at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and then practiced primary care to a mostly elder population before coming to Florida. Her passions include chronic disease management, care coordination, engagement of patients and care partners, and a focus on patients' quality of life. Welcome, Dr. Ross. Our next panelist is Candace Jacobs Robinson. Ms. Jacobs Robinson is a Florida licensed funeral director and embalmer, military spouse, mother to 14-month-old Abigail, and caregiver for her father who is living with dementia. Candace is intimately acquainted with the lifestyle needs and challenges unique to caregivers. 5 years ago, Candace launched Candace Jacobs Creations, which provides end-of-life care and pre-planning advisory services, as well as self-care and empowerment products to treat the emotional discomfort associated with making such overwhelming decisions. In February 2020, Candace joined Dr. Tipton, neurologist, as co-host of Long Live the Brains podcast. Candace has chosen to turn her painful experience of loss into passionate pursuit of purpose and fulfill her calling to equip the chronically ill, caregivers, and bereaved to still live abundantly and live a lasting legacy. Welcome, Ms. Jacobs Robinson. Our faith leader for our panel today is Dr. Jeffrey K. Rumlin, the pastor of Dayspring Church. Dr. Rumlin humbly serves as the pastor of Dayspring in Jacksonville, Florida. He attended Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida, earning his Bachelor of Science in journalism. He also received the Master of Divinity degree from the Interdenominational Theological Center, the Doctor of Ministry degree from the United Theological Seminary. In March of 2005, Dr. Rumlin was called to be the pastor of Dayspring Church. His ministry has led to several milestone events at Dayspring, including relocating the congregation from its Jefferson Street location to its current Dunn Avenue location, retiring a $1.1 million mortgage, establishing a child care center, Dayspring Christian Academy and Preschool. He's birthed Camp Dayspring and cultivated Dayspring Outreach Ministries. Currently, Dr. Rumlin is giving visionary leadership as the Dayspring Church as they prepare for their next phase of ministry with the construction of the Dayspring Community Life Center. With a strong commitment to serving God's church, Dr. Rumlin is equally committed to serve and give leadership to a Christian family. He is blessed to be married to Kimberly Rumlin, and together they are parenting 4 children. Welcome to all 3 of our panelists, and thank you again for agreeing to be a part of this important discussion. So we know that in the Black community, honoring and serving and preserving the lives of our elders is an important part of our cultural identity. And during this COVID-19 pandemic, our elders have experienced loss of loved ones, loss of routines, loss of connection with families and friends, affecting their mental well-being. And so, Dr. Ross, if you could just start us off by just talking about the prevalence of mental health disorders in our Black elders, our seniors that are 60 years and older, and what are some of the common mental health disorders of our Black elders?
Okay, thank you, Selena. So as I was preparing for this talk today, accurate prevalence data for, number one, elderly people, but also specifically Black elders. That happens for a couple of reasons, one of which is that care of the elderly, especially with regards to mental health, tends to be sort of limited. There aren't very many geriatricians, there aren't very many geriatric psychiatrists. So the availability of the research in that group is challenging. And then furthermore, I think one of the things that I want to emphasize that I think limits the availability of prevalence data is the underreporting of African Americans of mental health disorders. There's a lot of stigma historically, and it has carried through to the present with regards to this. And so I think that even for the population that we're talking about, as far as elders, white Americans are likely more often reporting mental health conditions, seeking help for them, and being treated. So that sort of limits the prevalence data, but we know that it's there. I see it every day in my practice. There's a lot of work to be done in that area.
So what are some of the common disorders that you see in your clinic? Do you see depression? Do you see dementia? Can you just give us an overview of some of the mental health disorders that are common in your practice?
Yes, definitely depression. This presents itself in a lot of different ways. People often don't simply say, I'm sad or I feel depressed. It sometimes reveals itself in unique ways, just depending on the person and how they present, how they are in real life. So sometimes it doesn't come out until several sessions where I'm picking up on something. There's a barrier there to other care, dealing with their blood pressure, diabetes, other health conditions, and I see that there's a block. I can't get through for some reason, and there's often a mental health condition. So in addition to depression, there's anxiety. I call this kind of the what if syndrome. So that's someone that's always thinking about the what ifs and what if I did it this way, or they're staying up at night thinking they can't get to sleep, so it affects then their sleep. And then you mentioned dementia. That is probably the most common mental health condition that I see. And then the challenge of that is that it tends to overlap with depression, anxiety. Someone with dementia can then present with these other mental health conditions. And so then you're challenged in how do you treat that whole spectrum of symptoms that someone may have.
So if I am 55 years and older, or a caregiver of someone 55 years and older, what signs and symptoms should I look for? You mentioned changes in sleep patterns, changes in, moods and that kind of thing. But when should I pick up the phone and make a call and reach out for help? So what are some of the signs and symptoms that I should look for if I'm a senior or if I'm a caregiver of a senior?
So with regards to depression, sleep can be affected there too. The challenge of that is that someone can sleep too much or they can be lacking sleep. So I would just say generally sleep changes is one sign that you would want to be looking out for. And then there's something called anhedonia, which is a very important factor of depression, which basically means that someone who previously had a lot of interest and was very engaged is now challenged to find joy in things they used to. So that's something that maybe is more subtle. Again, they might not say, I'm sad or depressed, but you're finding yourself or your loved one becoming more. Um, just less engaged and less interested in doing things, less motivated. And then with regards to dementia itself, when you're in the earlier stages, it's very subtle. Sometimes mood changes are what trigger more questions about memory. I use the word memory kind of loosely though, because it's not just, oh, I can't find my keys, or oh, I don't know where I put, my purse, or whatever the case may be. It's more so when someone's cognitive changes then are affecting their ability to do their day-to-day functions, what we call IADLs and ADLs. So those are things like managing finances, being able to shop independently, being able to bathe. So sometimes loved ones will say, oh man, my loved one isn't, they're not bathing as frequently. Why is that not happening? Different things like that, preparing meals. So when the day-to-day function can no longer be maintained independently, that can be a sign of not only dementia, but also a mood disorder. So those would be the things that I would say to be kind of, keeping a close eye out for yourself, but especially if you're caring for an elder.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ross. And what
Mhm.
are some of the treatment options for seniors in terms of managing things like depression and dementia?
So with regards to depression, I definitely would say, start with your primary care doctor, because that can at least get the ball rolling. A lot of the initial treatments, at least for depression and anxiety specifically, can certainly begin there. So the classes most commonly used, especially in our elders, are SSRIs and SNRIs. So both of those affect the serotonin levels. But I do always mention caution with those medications, because what is safe for someone who's 25 might have adverse reactions in someone who's over 65, which is the population that I see. So some of the antidepressants and anxiolytics have side effects that we don't like. For instance, over sedation, increasing fall risk, even some confusion, and even some can cause some cognitive impairments. So for instance, benzodiazepines, which are very commonly used for anxiety, so that's your Xanax, Valium, Ativan, they're effective, but I tend to stay away from those unless absolutely necessary in elders because of their side effect profile. And then when it comes to dementia, there are two classes of medicine that we have available as far as treatment. Again, I use that word loosely because we have unfortunately nothing on the market to actually cure dementia, or I say turn back the hands of time. The medicines that we do have available are intended to hopefully maintain someone's current cognition the way it is for as long as possible. And there's sort of a sweet spot, in my opinion, for when you start those. So, for instance, if someone comes to me and they're already in an advanced dementia stage, I don't find a lot of value to adding on those medications because they're more effective earlier on in the course of disease. And as someone is advancing with dementia, I try to limit the number of pills they're taking. So it's kind of a fine balance, but those are just generally some of the options that are available. And then, of course, I have to mention psychotherapy, psychology therapy, especially for the mood disorders, depression, and anxiety. I think that's really important to combine, not just medication, not relying upon that, but having someone that you can talk to.
Thank you so much. That is just great information. I've heard that spirituality and religiosity can be a protective factor also for some mental health disorders. And we know that spirituality is a very important part of the African American tradition. Can you talk a little bit about that and the role of religion and faith in coping with mental health disorders?
Absolutely. I can think of many of my patients just anecdotally who they've had a long history of mental health conditions or even early dementia when they can still engage with me pretty well, who, they might have been through various medications for treatment, even therapy. And many say, even with all of that, hey, my mood might not be great, but I look to the Lord or I still pray. And they fall upon that as their primary source of support and helping them to continue on. So I know for certain for myself personally, and then also I've seen it enough amongst my patients that having a faith based approach is critical. Of course, that connects you to God, but also there's a social factor to faith-based approach. Of course, COVID has changed that for us, but in general, you do have that family. So even if you don't have your own family support system or a friend support system, you know that you have your church family, and that is really important for a lot of people. So definitely trying to tap into all of those resources for the best results as far as mental health.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ross. And Ms. Jacobs Robinson, in your bio, we mentioned that your 75-year-old father is living with dementia. And Dr. Ross has talked about some of the signs and symptoms of dementia and also treatment. Can you just share with us, what is a day like as a caregiver of a person living with dementia, living with a mental health disorder?
Well, I would say that honestly, there is nothing necessarily typical about it. That's kind of, what comes along with neurodegenerative disease, dementia being one of them. And so I can just speak for myself personally, within my family unit. My mother actually serves, as the front lines, the primary caregiver for my father. So I serve more in a support capacity. Many people would refer to it more so as a care partner, but I am very actively engaged in his care alongside her. So typically my day starts out with a phone call to my mother early in the morning, and we honestly sync up schedules. I kind of feel like a little bit of an executive assistant sometimes, um, where we end up discussing, if he has a doctor's appointment coming up, if she has a doctor's appointment coming up and she needs me to sit with him. And we make those necessary adjustments. We have been blessed to be in a wonderful scenario. We kind of have a multi-generational setup here where we're living on adjoining properties, our families, mine and my parents. So as a result, I literally can walk across the yard in a situation of emergency, or if she needs me to sit with him and assist her on the days that I'm not having to go into the funeral home.
Wow, that's really convenient to be, right there together. I'm sure that removes some of the barrier of being a caregiver. So what are some of the challenges and rewards of being a caregiver? I know you mentioned the scheduling, and I'm sure at times it may be frustrating, overwhelming, managing your own schedule as well as managing the life of your father and your parents. So how do you manage that? The challenges, what are some of those challenges and what are some of the rewards of being a caregiver?
Well, I actually would like to start with the rewards, because I personally find that is what you need to focus on. You have to stay focused on that as a caregiver. Over the last 5 years, that has been absolutely vital to my personal caregiver journey. And so what I would say is that I see the main reward being that I get the opportunity to serve. And as I have served, I have gained. I get an opportunity to practice and master active listening, emotional agility, being versatile, learning how to respond with grace in situations that are honestly constantly in flux. My father is in advanced stage Alzheimer's disease. So we don't always know from a day-to-day basis what may come up. And you just have to be willing to roll with it. You have to be flexible and, practicing being present in the moment, a concept known as mindfulness, are all things that I see that I've had an opportunity personally to gain. And then it's been transferable in my character traits and my skill set as a funeral director. You know, the increase in empathy, the commonality, the common ground now that I'm able to have and easily establish with my client families, because a lot of them, when they come to my table, to arrange a service, have been facing some of these same challenges for a while. And it's good to be able to, it helps for me to be able to say that I understand, and literally I do. And as you shared earlier, in sharing my bio, that has kind of been the launching pad for my business and helping to, prepare and help other families prepare in end of life care and pre-planning. So those have been some of the major rewards. And then as well, I say on the relational side, I see myself as being able to be a keeper of precious memories for my father, his short-term memory has been severely impacted by neurodegenerative disease. And as a result, now I really treasure the opportunities, the little moments where now I'm holding his hand to make sure that he can safely make it across the street at a given point in time. I'm opening the car for him. I mean, just last week, I found myself just being, in awe of the role change. And that is one of the actual challenges, but it all depends on your perspective and how you look at it. And that has, been a reward. As far as the challenges are concerned, I would honestly say that it kind of comes with being a member of what's called the sandwich generation. It's those late 30-somethings-year-olds to, early 50s who are trying to balance and sometimes struggling with balancing raising a family, still working, and trying to, at the same time, provide care for aging parents. It's probably one of the greatest challenges. And then, of course, Dr. Ross probably knows caregiver burnout, being able to assess when you are at that point and when you need to ask for help. And anticipatory grief has been another great challenge for me personally. And I'm not ashamed to say there was a point in time where I've had to seek, professional assistance for that. It is difficult when you've had a certain relationship with your parents and it is so drastically changing. Seeing a person seemingly losing the essence of who they are, and you're anticipating knowing that because, Alzheimer's disease has no cure, that they're going to, soon you're going to experience a physical separation from them. And so those are some of the major challenges.
Thank you so much for sharing. I just love how you've reframed your role as a care partner, as a caregiver, the lens of empathy, the lens of preserving precious memories, and the importance of mindfulness and assessing your own mental health, right, as you're caring for the mental health of your loved one. So thank you for sharing that. So what advice would you offer to other caregivers who are trying to achieve balance and practice their own self-care and taking care of a loved one who may be living with a mental health challenge?
The first thing I would say is that you do need to be mindful of assessing where you are on a continuum. Are you thriving? Are you struggling? Are you in crisis? And if you find yourself at the point where you see that you are on the verge of being in crisis, if you are continually living in a state of overwhelm, you do need to reach out and you do need to ask for help, whether it be from, the faith community, whether it's from friends. I know for me, I do have other siblings, and I've had to say, we need to have a family meeting. We need to all get on the same page and, really assess what's coming in the future, and everyone assume the best role for them. And I think that is extremely important. That's one piece of advice that I would give. And I think really focusing on self-care is important. The reality is that you may not be able to exercise all the time. I know that's one of the main things that people like to mention for self-care. That may not at a given season fit into your life, but you have to find what works for you. For me, it's been prayer, journaling. I make sure and try to start my day out reading my daily devotionals, listening to inspirational music, singing. Those are all ways that you can provide care for yourself if you can't get to the gym. Those are all some things that just, some quick tips that I would, really encourage people to utilize. And then the last one is, once again, be willing to receive help, because sometimes what can happen is that people are offering the help, but you don't always think that they're equipped. You do need to be mindful that everyone is not equipped necessarily to handle someone who is living with dementia. But you need to assess that. But if you know that person is, if they have a background, if they have that experience, or if they have a willingness to learn, then accept the help, because you do need respite. You absolutely need respite from time to time.
Thank you for offering us those awesome tips. And they're very practical tips, journaling, meditating, prayer, and then assessing. Again, that point resonated throughout, what you've shared with us today, knowing what your limits and what your boundaries are. So thank you so much for sharing, Ms. Jacobs-Robinson. Both Dr. Ross and Ms. Jacobs-Robinson have mentioned the role of faith and spirituality and religiosity. And so we know that the power of the Black church cannot be underestimated. It's a cultural institution that is not only a source of spiritual refuge, but also a place of where our educational institutions were birthed. It's a place for social needs, and it's a place of support. So we have Dr. Rumlin with us. And so we'd like for you to just share with us, what is the role of the church in terms of supporting the mental well-being of Black elders?
Well, again, to Selena and to Lynn, thank you for this opportunity. As you said, the Black church is a part of the African-American community. And some would even argue you really don't have an African-American community without the Black church. And so, and especially the church, for the last roughly 100+ years, it has been because of our senior saints that have allowed the church to be what the church is. So when you talk about churches starting schools and churches starting financial institutions, we know that it was even, quote unquote, back in the day, it was those people who were up in age, who gave not only their financial resources, but they gave themselves to the church. And so with that being said, the church has always been rooted on the legacy of our senior saints. And so I think now what has happened here in this season of COVID-19, and really even before COVID came, as we talk about mental illness and the stress of various mental situations, is that, I think there once upon a time in the church, just like, again, the passage where Jesus cast out the Gadarene demoniac, the demon who lived in the tombs, that once upon a time, I think in the African American community, we just labeled everything as crazy. Well, and even in the church, we labeled everything as, quote unquote, that person is crazy, or that person has a demon. And again, I definitely believe in evil and all of that type of thing. But now, as we continue to grow and evolve, and even spiritually as we evolve, and there's nothing wrong with saying that you are saved, spiritual, and evolving at the same time, that now we understand, hey, no, this person, as they are getting up in age, they're not crazy. And even if it's middle age or whatever the age demographic is, mental illness is real. And I think we in the African American church we are continuing to grow even in our preaching, in our Bible studies, in our small group topics, to understand the stress of mental illness, to where we just don't put it off on, quote unquote, somebody's just demon possessed or somebody is just crazy. And so I think, Selena, for elderly people who make up the majority of all of our churches, that we have seen now throughout history, throughout the church's history, especially the Black church, where elders, because the church is community, elders always looked out for one another. And that's why, again, regardless of who the pastor was, regardless of even to a degree where the church went, it was about those people who were, as Dr. Ross said, they were family. They just didn't view themselves as church members. No, this is my church family. And so I think that the importance and the evolution of the church speaking to the issues and actually using the words mental illness it is vital, because again, as we continue to get older, we have to understand that that again, as we talk about Alzheimer's, dementia, and other things of the mind, that again, you can be saved and Holy Ghost filled all that you want to, but dementia doesn't discriminate. So we have to deal with these issues in the church, and we have to deal with these issues, yes, from a spiritual and biblical perspective. And I would argue, if we do deal with them from a biblical and spiritual perspective, we will also deal with them from a medical and sociological perspective as well, all within the confines of the church.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Roman. I do think it's important that we use an integrative approach, that we understand that mental illness is a disorder of the brain. And so, yes, we can still pray and we can still use our spiritual practices to support our mental well-being, but at the same time, it's nothing wrong with seeking services from providers like Dr. Ross, or seeking support from Ms. Jacobs Robinson. So thank you for emphasizing how we are evolving in our messaging in our faith organizations around mental health and well-being. So how has your ministry continued to provide services with COVID-19? How have you adapted with the pandemic? I know one area is funerals, the grief and loss. We've over 600,000 people have passed from COVID-19. And so the African-American community has been disproportionately impacted, as well as elders, in terms of hospitalizations, illnesses, death. And so how has your church specifically evolved in terms of the way that you're delivering your worship services or support services to your elders?
And I like the key word there, Selena, adapt and evolve. Dayspring, like countless other churches across the country, over the last year, we've gone virtual. However, at the same time, where, of course, when the pandemic first hit, March, April, where quote unquote everything was shut down, we were just 100% virtual. Well, as we continue to evolve and adapt, because we understand church family, to grow, family must be together. So we adapted, and the way our campus is set up, we have the ability to do worship service on our parking lot. And so we were now able to do service outside, tell people, hey, bring your lawn chairs or just sit in your car. And so, so for those seniors, because we understand for a number of seniors, the church is their social out. They don't have the opportunity, some of them, just to go to the mall the way that we did back when we were in high school and college, and and go here and go there. For them, yes, they come to church to get a word from the Lord, but they also come to church to be around people. And so to do parking lot services, of course, we've done food giveaways to the community, but then at the same time, we've taken our seniors through our diaconate ministry, and those deacons would reach out specifically to the seniors in their particular fellowship group and say, hey, we have fresh produce coming to the church this week. Hey, so we're going to just drive by, drop it off on your porch or at your front door. So hey, so you don't have to come out at least maybe for a few days, things of that nature. Also, the adaptability, and I'm so excited about it with our senior saints, that many of them were forced, and we just got to call it what it is. They were forced to get hooked onto Zoom. They were forced to get hooked onto YouTube and Facebook and to give online. And now what we've seen is, and of course, Dr. Ross and Sister Robinson can speak to it more than I can, that we've seen now, I believe, that as our senior saints continue to be open to learn new technology, that even keeps them sharper, So now, instead of saying, oh no, I'm against YouTube and da-da-da-da-da, only thing you got to do, just don't click on the crazy stuff that your grandchildren are clicking on. Just click on your church YouTube page and have a good time, and then get off and go on and do what you want to do. And so now, again, our giving, again, continues to evolve with a variety of methods. And I also want to push this, as we have evolved with technology and all that, and pushing our church members to embrace technology, we still embrace those who still want to do it, quote unquote, the old school way. I still have some saints that drive by the church during the week and drop their money off at the church office. Some mail their offering in, and they still use their church envelope. And I just a little joke, I've still wanted to know over this past year, where are y'all getting these church envelopes from? Because y'all haven't been inside the building to even get an envelope, but they get them some kind of way. And so I say all that to say, we have pushed, yes, the evolution and to adapt to the signs of the time, while at the same time not crucifying those who still, again, quote unquote, want to do it the old school way. But I would also say that one good thing about, again, when we talk about positives coming out of the pandemic from the church perspective, is that I think the church, and when I use the word church in this context, I'm talking about every individual believer. So I'm just not talking about the organization called Dayspring, and the staff, but the church, meaning brothers and sisters in Christ. They have stepped up, and again, they're calling one another, sending cards to one another, emailing one another. And so now, even when I call a particular member and check in, it does my heart glad to hear them say, oh, well, brother so-and-so gave me a call, or sister so-and-so sent me a card. And so now what that does for me is to say, hey, the saints are getting it, and they're getting it not so much because the church staff, pastor, and whomever is making them do it, i.e., hey, women's ministry is doing this, men's ministry is doing that. And those things are important, but now you see it just happening organically, where again, somebody may see, names being called on the virtual service, and next thing you know, because they see that person's name, hey, they pick up the phone and just call, they, drop a card in the mail. So I think the evolution of things is, yes, they've been forced, to quote unquote embrace technology. And I think some of them have now figured out, hey, you know what? It's not that bad. It's not that bad. And it keeps them sharp. And I think too, as we talk about intergenerational ministry and even just, strengthening the intergenerational ties of the family. And I tell them often, I say, listen here, call your children, or better yet, call your grandchildren, and they'll tell you how to work the iPhone. And watch this. And now you'll become even cooler to your grandchildren, because they're going to be tripping out saying, well, how in the world did Paw get an iPhone 12? And now you have something to talk about, so forth and so on. So absolutely. We have to keep evolving.
Yes. So what's next in terms of your worship services and COVID-19? Will you be reconvening soon? Are you opening back up your church anytime soon? What's the plan for the future as we manage and navigate COVID-19 and the pandemic?
Well, this past Sunday, this was our third Sunday having people back in the sanctuary. And what we have done here at Dayspring is we have segregated the membership role. So basically, those members whose last name begins, first initial begins with A through M, they're eligible to come to church on first and third Sunday. The members who first initial is N through Z, they're eligible to come through on second and fourth Sundays. Visitors, of course, are open to come any given Sunday. And so we do that, of course, one, to practice social distancing. So we know that the sanctuary will not reach capacity or even 75% capacity. Of course, we have our health ministry, and the Lord has blessed our church, as many other churches, to have registered nurses and nurse practitioners as a part of our congregation. So they're at the doors every week doing the temperature checks with the hand sanitizer and things of that nature. And so everyone must wear a mask while they're inside the sanctuary. I wear mine. The only time I take mine off is to preach, but while I'm sitting, we're standing, I'm singing through a mask just like everyone else. And so we're doing it this way to just kind of do a slow approach, because what we've learned here at Dayspring, and even as I talk to other colleagues, here in the city and even across the country, is that even with our planning, you still have a number of congregants, they're just not comfortable. So, even when you have a congregation who might have a, limited seating and they're doing theirs through registration, you might have some, again, who's doing it kind of like what we're doing here at Dayspring. But even regardless of whatever our particular method is, some people just are not comfortable yet. So again, we don't bash them. So of course, our virtual, and that word virtual, I want to be careful with that, because a number of congregations, we have been streaming for years. Before there was COVID, we were still streaming online. The only difference is we just couldn't have people in the building. So we're always trying to enhance our media ministry and our outreach through technology. And so we want to take a slow approach, with the modified reopening. And as we see things happen, as we move into the summer, again, we saw what the president said today concerning, outdoors and not wearing masks and things of that nature. And we know people, even regardless of what the CDC says and the president says, and even local officials, people still have to feel comfortable within themselves. And so, our thing is to, hey, those who are comfortable will make it, as safe as possible. I'll say this too, we're not in church all day. Praise God for that. And I let them know, hey, we can't be in here all day, so hey, we're going to get in here, hour and 30 minutes max. That's with communion. Hour and 15 minutes without communion. So the thing is just to, kind of slow walk it, see what happens. And hopefully, as at least now that the phrase in church, the doors of the church are open, that those who are connected to the church will begin to come back into the church. But I want to say this, I think these are exciting times for pastors, church leaders, and just congregants in general, because now we literally have the opportunity to reimagine and reshape how we do church here in the 21st century. And I think that's exciting.
Awesome. And kudos to you and your leadership, and in terms of continuing services in a creative way, and also in line with CDC guidelines. So we have a couple of questions in the chat box that I'd like to direct to our panelists. Dr. Rumlin, have you seen an increase in depression or anxiety in your congregants over the past year?
Not known to me. Where someone has just, picked up the phone and gave me a call and said, hey, Pastor, I want to talk to you about this, that, and the other. So nothing has increased, again, to my knowledge. That does not mean, because, and I think this is very important to that question, that especially in the African-American community, we know that many of us suffer in silence. So I would argue that just because the number of phone calls have not increased to me, I would still argue that people have been suffering, with depression and the like, and various mental illness. Because again, when you have separation, again, from biological family, and then social family through church and sororities, fraternities, and the like, yes, that does something to you. I mean, even myself and other pastors, again, we'll be honest, and I've told some of my colleagues, it was rough, preaching to a camera. Don't get it twisted, man. It's we don't like to hear the amens for our egos, but again, preaching in the Black church, and even just worship in the Black church, singing in the Black church, praying in the Black church, it is a communal thing. And so while yeah, we had to preach to cameras every Sunday with maybe just, again, between maybe 5 to 8 people, between maybe 3 to 4 people on the praise team, your musicians, and then your media team, that plays on you, because you're wondering, hey, is anybody even listening to me on the other side of this camera? So I want to say that although, I did not get an increase in calls, I would say, again, my assumption, no data, but because too many of us suffer in silence, that yes, I do believe people have suffered, of course, through this pandemic, in the area of mental health and mental illness.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that suffering in silence, because next month, May, is Mental Health Awareness Month. And I think it's an opportunity for us to amplify the message of mental health, and that recovery is possible, and the importance of it's okay not to be okay, and to seek out resources. So I'm also going to direct that question to Dr. Ross as well. Have you seen an increase in your patients in terms of depression and anxiety in your practice over this past year with COVID-19?
I would say absolutely. I don't think there's I can't think of a single patient that at some time over the course of the year has come to me without some reference to how COVID has affected them mentally. Just the impact of the duration of it. I think, at the beginning, we were all, we were nervous, we were confused, we didn't know what was going on. But the fact that it has lasted for so long, I would say virtually all of my patients have had some degree of impact from it on their mental health in one way or another. And it's been difficult because even before COVID, the resources for mental health services in Jacksonville tend to be somewhat limited for various reasons, whether it's location and access, whether it's acceptance of insurance. So many mental health providers do not accept Medicare. A lot of them are cash pay. There's just a lot of barriers to mental health services. And then you add a pandemic on top of that, and the resources shrink even further. One thing that I thought was really nice that Baptist implemented was something called the Phone Pals system, or the Phone Pals program, where volunteers were actually making calls to individuals that we as providers identified needed just someone to reach out to them. They lived alone, didn't have local family, they were isolated. And I have many patients who've expressed to me how valuable that was. And in fact, they still communicate regularly with their phone pals. I've heard from several people. So yes, absolutely. It has made a huge, it caused a huge increase in depression and anxiety.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. And there are a couple of questions in the chat box for you as well. One question is, how do you begin conversations with seniors who are demonstrating some of the signs that you mentioned earlier, to get them to help or encourage them to accept help? So what are some of the ways that we can convince seniors to receive help as it relates to mental health?
That's a good question. A lot of family members are challenged by this. We'll get often phone calls in advance of the visit from a family member saying, I'm concerned about this and this. So I have to be very creative in how I bring it about. So I've gotten this is just something that we ask all of our patients. We're just trying to treat the whole person. And we know that your mental health affects all areas of life. But I would say that is one tactic for a loved one to call and let the provider know in advance of appointment so that they can bring it up in a unique way. But also just being present at appointments. So sometimes I find that elders come alone to appointments because they want to maintain their independence. They're still wanting to do that, and that's great. But there does come a point at which, if you can just get your foot in the door and come to appointments, that can kind of at least open up the conversation. And a lot of times, I find that patients, even if they don't want to hear what their loved one has to say, sometimes they're thinking about it. So it is not often in a single visit, though, I'll say, but at least we can start the conversation, and people do tend to open up to it over time. So.
Wonderful. Thank you for those tips. Final question in the chat box. At what point should a senior transition from an internal medicine primary care provider to a geriatrician?
My answer to that is at any time. I often tell the story of I had a 99-year-old patient who was referred to me for a new patient visit, and she told me she felt she was too young to be seeing me. She didn't think that she was old enough to be in my practice. So I thought that was interesting. So age is really a state of mind. It's just a number, but to me, the sooner you establish, even if you don't feel like you're quote unquote old enough, we get to know you when you are doing very well, so that as time goes on, if subtle changes are happening, even if you or your loved ones aren't picking up on it, I might, or my social worker might, or someone else in the office. So even if you just come to us and you just come in for your annual wellness visit once a year and that's it, that's okay. But at least you're already established. And geriatricians, we just have a different approach and a different way that we look at things. So I think any time is the right time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ross. I have a couple more questions in our chat box. This question I'll direct to Ms. Jacobs Robinson. We've mentioned stigma and how mental illness is sometimes viewed through a negative lens. How do we stop suffering in silence, and how do we address stigma in the Black community?
I'll try to address that question from the perspective, from a caregiving perspective, and what the challenges that I faced as a caregiver to my father living with dementia. And I would say that one of the biggest challenges early on in my particular situation was just coming out, with the fact that my father had been diagnosed and living with dementia. And there is a big stigma surrounding that particular diagnosis. And a lot of times we are in a situation to where you want to keep the person's confidence because they're not wanting to have other people know that this is something that they're dealing with. And I think that actually communicating what is happening with your loved one, the challenges that you are facing, is one of the biggest and most important steps to combating the stigma that surrounds this particular neurodegenerative disease. And it's a big issue in the Black community because we end up suffering needlessly longer than we should because we don't want anyone in our business, quote unquote. And that is something that is not only a big issue with dementia diagnosis, it's a big issue with domestic abuse, sexual assault, a whole lot of other challenges within our community that end up lending towards the mental illness in the first place. So I think that that's one step. You need to not be in denial about what's happening. You need to confront it and then come up with an action plan. It doesn't have to be something that is overwhelming in and of itself. There are steps that you can take to make being a caregiver or any other challenge you may be having more manageable. So those, I think, are two important steps. And then the last one I would say is exactly what I said earlier. You have to be willing to seek and accept help. It's okay not to be okay. And I know that is, kind of the cornerstone statement during Suicide Awareness Month. but it's something that we need to tell other people far more often. And it's the gift that I give to my grieving families, you know, across the table. I tell them it's okay for you to feel whatever you're feeling right now, wherever you are in your grieving process. If you're angry right now, if you're sad right now, you know, all of that is okay, as long as you don't get to the point of some type of complicated grief. It's okay to feel exactly what you're feeling in this moment. Don't judge it, and don't allow others to judge it. So that's the advice that I would give.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of resources in the chat box. Starting Point Behavioral Healthcare in Yulee treats seniors with Medicare. We also have one, I know I keep saying final question, but this is the final question because we're almost at the end of our time. There's a question about COVID-19 vaccine. How important is it for you to encourage your patients, Dr. Ross, and your congregants, Dr. Rumlin, to get the COVID vaccine? And we'll let Dr. Ross address that initially.
What I've learned about this as far as vaccines, and honestly, this was even prior to COVID, it came with people not wanting to get the flu vaccine, pneumonia case may be. I have learned to meet people where they are. They have to have a comfort level to do whatever it is that you're offering to them. So with any care choices that I present to my patients, it's just that, a choice. But I do try to present them with the data. I try to back it with the science, have them understand that without enough of us getting vaccinated, we will not return to some degree of normalcy, whatever that will look like. So it really is just me attempting to educate. And then if someone says, I don't want to get it, or I refuse to get it, I then ask why, try to understand what their barriers are, because maybe it's something that they just heard that's inaccurate and they just need it to be cleared up. So for me, I think that's the biggest thing, is just telling people, hey, I got it. I encourage it, but also, again, not trying to force anything upon anyone. I think that's important, no matter what it is, with regards to making medical recommendations.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. Dr. Rumlin, if you could close us out with your response.
I concur with Dr. Ross. What I do here at Dayspring, again, I am a pastor, and I know my role. I am not a medical doctor. However, I do believe I am educated, so I do know the information that has been presented. And so, while, and matter of fact, this past Friday, our church campus was a vaccination site. So I am pro-vaccine on our Sunday broadcast and even Wednesday broadcast. We have the listing of locations, especially for those residents here in Jacksonville that live on the north side. So we're promoting the three major sites of Legend Center, Gateway, and EWC. But at the same time, and I tell them, I say, hey, if you are comfortable with it and you want it, here's where you go. But if you have some questions, don't listen to your family members, don't listen to your friends. You go talk to a professional medical provider, an MD, again, a nurse practitioner, because we do know that, and we've heard that, you know, because of whatever other underlying conditions a person may have, they might not need to take the vaccine at this particular time. However, I'm not the person to be able to make that determination. So my thing is, like Dr. Ross said, education, put the information out there. And so we promote it, and we promote not just only getting the vaccine, but for those that do have questions, again, don't go to the barbershop hospital, and don't go to the beauty shop urgent care center. No, go to a professional medical provider, and let them tell you yay or nay. And so, yeah, so we are pro, you know, we are pro vaccine, because again, I want to see a church full of people on Sundays.
Thank you all so much. To our panelists, this has been rich discussion. Thank you for your perspectives, for your wisdom, and for the information and also inspiration we got today. We're going to conclude our session. We have a couple of resources that we like to share with our audience. We're right at our time here. We'd like to invite you to our next two sessions. This is a three-part series. Our next series is scheduled for May 11th, and that session focuses on mental well-being of adults, of parents, caregivers, and adults. And then on June 22nd, we have our final session supporting the mental well-being of our children, teens, and young adults. So we're covering the whole lifespan here. We started with our elders, then to our adults, and then of course, we can't forget about the babies. So go ahead and register for those sessions, and we look forward to seeing you all there. Next slide, please. This is one of our community resources, NAMI, the National Association of Mental Illness. They actually are providing support sessions, mental health support sessions. And so their contact information is here on the screen, as well as their website. So we encourage you to reach out to NAMI if you know people in your community, in your church, in your workplace that may be having some challenges navigating this time during the pandemic. Next slide. Again, we want to thank you for being part of our webinar today. We want to thank Baptist Behavioral Health, as well as provide some information regarding places where you can seek out services. And I'll turn it over to Lynn Sherman. Thank you for allowing me to be your host.
Thank you, Selena. Would everyone please join us in a virtual applause for the moderator and the panelists. The information they shared this evening with us is so important to the mental well-being of our elders. We want to thank you, the audience, for being a part of tonight's discussion, because we truly do believe that we're all in this together. And we look forward to seeing you at our next session on May 11th, as Selena said. So on behalf of Baptist Health, our panelists, and all of the team members of Baptist Health and our behavioral health department, thank you for joining us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks so much. Good night, everyone.